You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Tim the Nerd coming at you with another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. Welcome to the party, folks. Joining me in the chair next to me, we have the greatest legal mind in the Pacific Northwest. We have Professor Aubrey. How you doing?
I am doing great, Tim. I'm having a wonderful week, and I can't wait to share some time with our listeners.
All right, how has your week been going?
Well, to be honest, I've had some challenges. I had oral surgery, and as you're listening to the show, hopefully I'm fully recovered and not in any pain. But that procedure is coming up tomorrow morning. I'm very nervous about it. The last week has been great. So I'm sort of running into the scary thing after a really wonderful week in which I smoked a bunch of meat, like 75 pounds of salmon, 10 pounds of halibut, 16 turkeys, and a whole pig.
You put the meat in its place?
Yes, put the meat on a spit and roasted it. And that was super fun. I did it with this club that I'm a part of called Meat Smoke. And we do the smoked meats for a variety of events, mostly at Reed College.
No bar mitzvahs? No, I'm kidding.
No, we're not contractable, although we might be. I mean, if you offered us enough money, we'd probably do your wedding or something.
We break the law. Anything else fun going on?
It's almost my birthday.
Well, there you go.
Almost another year older.
Monumentous occasion there. The reason I stalled there is that, apart from work, I, just had a boring week, and there's nothing wrong with that. But most importantly, though, the way I've calculated it, I'm close to getting my grandkids.
Yay!
So excited for that. My oldest is moving, and when I say my grandkids, my feline grandkids, folks, my oldest is moving, and he can't bring his cats with him. So I will be adopting my grandchildren, and they will live with me, and I will change their names to Annie and Mimsy.
Annie and Mimsy.
There you go. Just so I can say, shut up, Mimsy.
Yes.
But, anyway, I make myself laugh over the silliest things.
Well, that's very exciting. And, of course, did we talk about your job, getting a job last week?
Yeah.
How's that been going?
So far, so good. For like me, the best type of job is a job to where you show up, you get put in a little spot, and they dump like 1,000 or 2,000 piece puzzle in front of you and say, you have 8 hours to fix that. And that's my headspace right now. That's what I can tolerate getting through, because most importantly, something like that, you are always doing something and time just simply flies. One thing I hate about retail, and I think anybody can relate to this, are the times to where it is slow and there's nothing to do. And sure, it's great if you have coworkers and, you can chat and the day can go by fast that way. But, sometimes you're staffed in an department alone or something like that, and just time will go so slow. I mean, what I've found is, it's only been a week, so, this could change, folks. But I have found the time has gone really, really fast. It's like I punch in, and before I know it, I punch out.
That's great.
Again, for my needs, where my headspace is at in terms of what I need from a job and what I can offer it, like, I really lucked out.
Yeah, I think, what you've described of your job sounds just perfect. And, it has some really great benefits, and it's Monday through Friday, you have weekends off, it's a daytime job, like just all the things that people look for in a job they could stay in for a while.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the type of job that, 10-year-olds are dreaming to become, but that does not make it a bad job. Not everybody's going to have that luxury of, becoming a firefighter or an astronaut or something like that. You need plumbers. You need other things.
Yeah, you need people to count the money.
Or something like that.
Yes.
At the strip club, folks.
They need somebody to be a bouncer at the strip club.
Yeah. I'm so intimidating, It's like that one Bugs Bunny cartoon. He flexes and then his muscles go underneath. But, well, before we get into our main topic today, we are going to talk about the author of the song "Let's Put the X in Sex," Paul Stanley from Kiss.
I can't wait to talk about Paul Stanley.
Yes, he put out a tweet today. He's 71 years old, no degree in medicine that I'm aware of. If there are people out there who are aware of Paul Stanley being a doctor in anything and not, penisology, let me know. He put out a statement on Twitter today, and I will read it verbatim. That way, if people can judge our opinions based on us actually repeating what he said and not conjecture, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay.
I think it's important not to magnify voices that we'd rather not hear from, but I understand that it's necessary for our listeners to get the context of what we have to say about it.
Because what I found in the social media realm as well is that, I get what you're saying. And I think there are a number of people who are, in my opinion, rightfully so, upset at what he said. But there is the danger on social media of, things being attributed to this situation that, aren't true, if that makes sense. And I think that's the reason why I feel it's important to say the statement so that when we actually say our thoughts, which are not going to be kind to him, it's fair.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. All right. From Paul Stanley from Kiss. There is a big difference between teaching acceptance and normalizing and even encouraging participation in a lifestyle that confuses young children into questioning their sexual identification as though some sort of game, and then parents in some cases allow it. Again, folks, this is the guy who wrote the song "Let's Put the X in Sex." These are individuals who, as adults, may decide reassignment is their needed choice, but turning this into a game or parents normalizing it as some sort of natural alternative, or believing that because a little boy likes to play dress up in his sister's clothes, and remember, we're talking about the band that dressed up and wore makeup on stage because they were directly responding to the glam band influence of the 70s, but continue, Tim. Okay. We should lead them steps further down a path that's far from the innocence of what they are doing. With many children who have no real sense of sexuality or sexual experiences caught up in the fun of using pronouns and saying what they identify as, some adults mistakenly confuse teaching acceptance with normalizing and encouraging a situation that has been a struggle for those truly affected and have turned it into a sad and dangerous fad. Fuck this guy. I mean, this is the trouble when stuff like this happens, because, he has every right to run his mouth. And he can't control people's, giving their opinion back to him, whether positive or negative about what he says. But why do people that have no knowledge in a subject whatsoever want to continue to come across as experts in their field when they're clearly not? All he's doing is spouting off talking points that he probably saw on Fox News or something like that, What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts on the tweet are that it reflects a societal grooming to this opinion that he's sharing, in the same way that there has been societal grooming about everyone and everything. So it makes me think of prior historically marginalized populations that have had the same types of arguments used against their civil and human rights. most famously, perhaps, the idea that slaves really benefited from slavery because it protected them from having to find their own economic way. They were provided with housing and clothing and heat and food, and otherwise they wouldn't have been able to get those things because they were such inferior people. That was an opinion that was held by many people. So let us not forget that opinions are not
assholes.
are not facts and aren't predictors of the future. So, that's just opinions, right? Do they matter at all? No, they don't. Because they are a reflection of a snapshot of society at this moment. And we know that societies, like people, are constantly changing.
Yeah, and maybe it's on me a little bit for getting worked up about this, but it's, again, it makes zero sense why anybody, would openly speak about a topic they know nothing about, because, he's talking under many, many false assumptions going on here, like they've got people convinced that, parents could bring their young child to the doctor 2 weeks after the child's born saying, we changed our mind, we want a girl.
Right.
Stuff's not happening.
Or the idea that kids do play with things. Like, they play with adult ideas in order to learn. Mm-hmm. Like, I was married in elementary school. I don't know if you were.
No, I was never popular with the ladies. My goodness, I'm not popular with them now.
I had a husband in elementary school, and we would play house. And that's just all, like, mimicking, behavior that you've seen. Mm-hmm. It also strikes me as very similar to the argument about the Americans with Disabilities Act and what has to be done to accommodate people with disabilities now under that law, which is very different from what it was before that law. And before that law, it was very easy to say people in wheelchairs can't work in warehouses, or people that can't see can't do anything, or people that can't hear can't do anything. But what we've had to do is adapt and look at people's strengths and identify what it is they can do well, and then give them the tools that they need in order to do that. And this is sort of the same thing, which is terror to identify the problem. Like, for so many years, we didn't talk about, air quotes, crippled people. There was a dirty secret, right? Trans people have been around forever. It's proven time and time again that it's not a modern fad. It is a universal human experience to discover who you are. And maybe you discover that your gender doesn't match who you are inside. And historically, we've had an example of that. So it's not a fad. Yes, people may feel uncomfortable when the first time they have to identify their pronouns in a group. But it's no big deal once you get used to it. It's just like non-gendered bathrooms. People freaked out. And there are non-gender bathrooms all over the place, and nothing bad is happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's scare tactics in a lot of ways. I mean, in some ways, I mean, I think the fact that, more people are allowed now to consider the fact that, hey, maybe I do need to consider the transition route, I guess is a sign of a good thing, but also, that could be what scares people too, because it's different, it's change. I mean, it's like, this is maybe not the best analogy, but, think about left-handers. For the longest time, people were told not to, write with their left hand. It was bad or something like that. But then once that stopped happening, there was a rise in people that were left-handed. But, statistically, it got to a point and plateaued. And that was because people were no longer doing the antiquated, don't write with your left hand type of deal,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dad is ambidextrous now because he was right-handed and was beaten for using he was left-handed and was beaten for using his left hand, so he learned to use his right hand.
Well, that must have made the colonel very valuable in the military.
As a right-hander or as an ambidextrous person. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he could be like one of those guys that have like grenades all across his chest, and he takes them with both hands, pulls out the pins, and you're going to hell for America.
That really wasn't his bag, but possible.
Okay, anything's possible.
Anything's possible.
All right. Well,
so let's just close up this Paul Stanley. Let's button this up. Paul Stanley is not qualified to make statements that he's made. What he's saying isn't really true, and why would anybody listen to him?
Exactly, and I try to apply that logic to myself when it comes to me talking about social media. I mean, if you saw what the types of stuff I was posting like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I mean, we're talking a lot more political stuff. But again, I'm not an expert on the political stuff. I know what I know from the news, and that still keeps me informed, but that doesn't make me an expert.
Right.
And again, you can tell he's getting all of the things he listed are the talking points they're talking about on conservative news outlets about trans people. It's scare tactics, and it's just ultimately, yeah. I don't care if it was Paul Stanley. I don't, and again, as a progressive, calling somebody out, but. If you were going to be a mouthpiece for a particular subject and you are not an expert on it, you are doing a disservice. Not only to the topic that you believe in, you're doing a disservice to yourself as well, because ultimately you do come across as stupid. You can say a lot of flowery words that, may impress people with how they're put together, but that doesn't make it right.
Right. Exactly.
All right, let's move on to some reminiscing. We're going to roll back the hands of time here, folks, and we're going to have ourselves a little fun thinking back about movies in 1997. It is the Nerdy Five, and Professor Aubrey and Tim the Nerd will be giving you each our 5 choices for our Nerdy Five for the best movies of 1997. Now, what do you remember about that year?
97 was a good year for me. I graduated from college, got my first professional job, was still living in Tennessee then, was 21, and was having a really good time. Maybe I didn't realize it at the time, but I was having a lot of fun.
Yeah, me, 97, I had my first apartment. That was my first full year there, and 97 was when I turned 21, and, we'll go a little bit into that when I go into my movie choices here. But yeah, I mean, to your point, it was like the stress at that time that I was dealing with, that I wished I could grow up and get into a relationship and be an adult, I wish I could go back to that stress, because like I worked a job at a parking lot and I could bring my own music, books, I could bring a TV if I wanted to. And every weekend I went to the movies. It's like no fucking responsibilities apart from rent and movie money.
Yeah, those were the days, right? And we thought we thought it was so hard, and that we were real adults.
I was, oh my God, I still had a lot more growing up to do at that particular point. I mean, I do think my mother could have prepared my sister and I better for adulthood. I think parents do have some responsibility in that, but I was also not prepared, and I was a goof,
I'd say by that point, I was, being done with your college education is like a huge achievement at the time, because it's 4 years, it's mostly a slog, and it's mostly just figuring out how to do things within the college institution. So I was really, really happy to get out of that institution it took me 5 years to graduate, so after 5 long years. at the university. And I was glad to be working full time, maybe making a little more money than I had been living on before. I had a...
You could buy the good ramen. No, I'm kidding.
Right. I had a boyfriend I really liked. And yeah, it was just generally a really good year.
It was, and looking back through the movies from that era, in some ways, it was the end of the glory days of Hollywood as, it was. I mean, the internet was there, but not quite a big thing yet. You certainly didn't have streaming or anything like that. That was, at least a decade away. But yeah, it was probably the last golden era of Hollywood that, I think we're going to experience. Not that I think movies are going to go away, but I think we could get to a point to where, the corporate run nationwide chains probably will go the way of the dodo. But, the flip side of that is that your Duluth, Minnesotas are probably going to miss out on movies where Portland, Oregon will, still have plenty of options.
Right. So the people in Duluth will be streaming, right? They won't be going out to the movies, which is probably good in Minnesota. It's fucking cold. You don't need to go outside. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing back then about movies was that when there was an independent film, it was news. Like, there were so few independent films that it was like, oh, there's a new independent film. Let's go see it.
But by the end of that year, but like 98 on, I think, was right around the time where independent movies became like indie rock. It became, indie rock used to be legitimately indie with, smaller labels putting it out. But once Nirvana hit, indie rock became corporate.
Sure. Everything must become corporate in our capitalist system.
Yeah.
Because wealth has to accumulate. And anyway, I just remember like there being the movie theater that would show what we called art house films. Mm. And that was the sophisticated place to go watch a movie. And it was things like Sex, Lies, and Videotape, or I can't think of another example, but you remember that movie, Sex, Lies, and Videotape?
Yeah, Steven Soderbergh's first film.
Yes, it was very controversial. And so it wasn't shown at the regular movie theaters in the South, so it had to be shown as an art house film.
Did it give you fans in the front row?
Lordy. So, anyway, it seemed to me that there are now more independent artists because the technology has become so democratized.
Yeah, I mean, I think a number of, what we used to consider indie films are now being, primarily shown on streaming. You may be lucky, and we're certainly very lucky living in Portland, Oregon. We will still get theaters playing those smaller films compared to a Duluth, Minnesota. Sorry, Duluth. Anyway, but yeah, it's different.
Yeah.
It's different. All right. Well, how about we start and go back and forth like we normally do, give our thoughts on it, and then the other person can offer their thoughts if they have that too. Do you want to begin?
Sure, I'll begin. So we're talking about 1997 and the movies that we most enjoyed from that year. And I'm going to have to start with the number 10 film of the year, which was The Full Monty. So as we were just talking about sort of smaller films, this was a smaller film. It is about a Irish or Scottish.
I think it was mainland Britain, but but one of the ones with the accent, and that's not London. So
right. So it's about a guy who becomes a stripper, essentially. Mm-hmm. And that's, the big triumph of being able to make money is that he becomes a stripper and he's very wildly successful. It's funny, it's sweet. It features some really good actors.
Robert Carlyle.
Robert Carlyle, who later was in Trainspotting, which was such a great film as well. So I love that one. Did you ever see that one?
Indeed, and Grand Rapids was good in that way. We had Studio 28, the largest movie theater in the world at that particular time. It was on 28th Street, which is why they call it Studio 28, but they had 20 different screens in one place, so really good, and which meant they had the opportunity to play some smaller films. And I did see The Full Monty on the big screen before it, got to before award season, basically. I mean, once the Academy Awards kicked in, then a lot more people rushed to the theaters to see it, but I saw it just as it was coming out, and what a great funny movie, but it wasn't, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a comedy. I would just say it's a slice of life, because sometimes life can be funny. Mm-hmm. And that's what I loved about it. And of course, the soundtrack. There are a lot of movies from the 90s that put out some damn good soundtracks. And, for my money, if you have a top 10, maybe not a top 5, but a top 10, the Full Monty soundtrack has to be on it for that decade.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I agree. Okay, what's your first?
Surprisingly, I do got a couple of what would be considered, at least in 1997, art house films. My first one was Chasing Amy.
Nice,
Kevin
love that
Smith
one.
Classic, yeah. I had been aware of Kevin Smith because I was supposed to go see Clerks in theaters in '94, but didn't get a chance to go. So I was aware of him and remember seeing commercials for Mallrats, but never saw any of his films. And then one time there was a movie theater at next to Woodland Mall in Grand Rapids that played second run movies. So you come with $1, you're watching a movie, and I loved going to that place all the time. One time they didn't have any other movies that I saw that I wanted to see. So I thought, hey, I see this Chasing Amy, I'll give it a shot. So put my money down and was. From the start, I loved the jokes, because they had some really edgy jokes, but didn't walk the lines of negativity. The African American guy at the film, who is the militant black comic book maker who's secretly gay, does the big speech at the start where, he says, Darth Vader, the audience is expected to believe that this big black Nubian god that is Darth Vader wants to be a white guy underneath, and then Jason Lee's character, and that's, we were introduced to Jason Lee in that movie, stands up and goes, "Isn't that true?" And the comic book guy, pulls out a fake gun and shoots it, which clears the audience, and you find out that they were all in it together, in order to end that Q&A that they were in, because it's a story about comic book artists and love, and it did at the time have a very progressive story on the the LGBTQ community. Hindsight being 2020, it is problematic. However, in his defense, Kevin Smith wrote and directed it. I would say, at least that movie opened the door to some conversations that people weren't having at that particular time. Has it aged well? In some ways, no, it hasn't. But I don't think it was supposed to, because I think in some ways it kind of does really well about showing how naively optimistic you are in your 20s,
Right. Yeah, I think it's a really good movie. As a queer person in the 90s, it was problematic to be queer, particularly in the South. Matthew Shepard didn't get killed in Wyoming all that long ago in the 90s, because I believe it happened in 1993 or 4.
Yeah.
And, there was real consequences, social and, up to violence kind of consequences for being gay. And so I think even though it doesn't play that well now, the story at the time, I think, was normalizing to some audience members who maybe that wasn't their experience, right? But they have it presented in a comedic movie, and maybe they weren't expecting that, and they just can, I think it's good to have, that's why exposure and representation matters.
And I gotta say, and being the goofy guy I was back in Grand Rapids at that particular time, like, the folks I knew were white bread, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, so being able to see that movie was like, yeah, whoa, these are people I've never met before, and it was intriguing. And again, I think it is important to acknowledge when a piece of art like that does end up showing its true meaning, I guess, at the end. But I don't think the reason I kind of give this a pass is that I don't think his intention ever was for anything negative, of course. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Kevin Smith has also been very open about, hey, I should have done this and not this. So, and also too, it was my introduction to Jay and Silent Bob. I mean, for as much as I criticize Kevin Smith now and what he calls his movies, Jay and Silent Bob are still funny and cool.
Yeah, I mean, Jay and Silent Bob have their audience, which I guess you're a member of.
Yes and no. I would say yes for stuff like Comic Book Men. That was a great show. Also his podcast. I think ultimately Kevin Smith found his true calling in podcasting.
Just like you.
There you go. So, so Chasing Amy, definitely one I would recommend people go out and check out. Now, what is your next one?
I'm going to stick with the popular movies of the era, and then I'll finish up with a couple of maybe unknowns. So, my next one is Good Will Hunting. So Good Will Hunting is another movie, like you said you saw before award season. I saw Good Will Hunting before award season. And it was just unknown actors. The reason I saw it was Robin Williams was in it. And I love Robin Williams. So I thought, this has got to be a great project if Robin Williams is in it. Mm-hmm. So I saw it, and I cried, I laughed, I cared about the characters, I wanted to know what was going to happen in their lives, and I loved all the actors. So, I think it's Ben Affleck and
Matt Damon.
Matt Damon. These some of their best performances.
I loved that movie. I saw that, before it became a big thing too, and ended up buying the screenplay of that at Barnes & Noble. And I gotta tell you, I was not the only person who had a crush on Minnie Driver by the end of that movie.
Oh my gosh, Minnie Driver, so cute. So cute. But also kind of like good at playing an awkward person.
Indeed. And that's one of those films too that, Kevin Smith ended up sending the script from Good Will Hunting to Harvey Weinstein, and we know Harvey Weinstein's a scumbag now, but I can talk about what he did in film, but they put it out as an independent film, and Robin Williams signed on at much reduced cost compared to what he would normally do for like The Nutty Professor or whatever. The Flubber movie that he did. The
Flubber movie, yeah.
Oof. But that movie did ultimately ended up, like I talked about, a lot of indie films ended up just blowing up and, made a decent amount of money at the box office. And we know what it did for Matt Damon and Ben Affleck after that. I mean, that definitely catapulted their careers.
Oh, absolutely. They wouldn't, it was their big break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they'd been around before, but without Good Will Hunting, they're maybe trying to host a game show. I don't know. All right, my next one is an interesting choice here, but it's a movie that definitely made an impression on me. It was from director James Toback, and it's called Two Girls and a Guy. Starring Heather Graham, Natasha Gregson Wagner, who was Natalie Wood's daughter, and Robert Downey Jr. And this was right around the time to where, unfortunately, he's been open about this. This was right about the time to where his drug habits started seriously affecting his career. And this was one of his, many attempts at making a comeback before it ultimately, did what before he ultimately learned the lessons he needed to learn in order to get on the straight and narrow, let's put it that way. But it's a simple premise. It's about a guy who is cheating on two different women, giving them the impression they're the one and only. They both meet up at his place, expecting to meet him there alone, and they meet each other, find out what he did, and then they ultimately confront him in his apartment. And the film is set in that apartment, and it's them just kind of sorting everything out. And by the end of it, he apologizes to one and the other one goes away. But it was, in a lot of ways, a way for Robert Downey Jr., somewhat similar to what he did with Iron Man. It was him kind of using some of his public persona at the time and using it for his character, which worked really well.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, it was really good acting.
Yeah. Did you see it?
I did see it. I don't remember it much. Like, in my memory, it was a rom-com.
No, it's a serious movie.
Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe I'm thinking of something else with Robert Downey Jr. in it.
Certainly possible.
Yeah.
But anyway, what is your next one?
Well, my next one, keeping with the popularity, is Con Air. Dun, 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 dun. So, Con Air is not the kind of movie that I usually like. But it was just so over the top and ridiculous. The premise was ridiculous. The action was ridiculous. Like, there was nothing believable about any of it. And that's sort of what is so great about it, I think. It's not as ridiculous as Snakes on a Plane, but it's, like...
Close.
Close, but still, I think it's the acting that's so good. Nick Cage at the height of his sanity.
Put the bunny down.
Put the bunny down.
John Malkovich as the bad guy. Like, he was chewing scenery. He wasn't, because John Malkovich has done theater training. He's classically trained, could do, all the Shakespeare, blah, blah, blah. But, nothing makes me sadder than the agent lost his bladder on the airplane. He was having so much fun. And, for me, I love movies like that are escapist, that take advantage of the big screen, the big sound coming at you, that immerse you in the experience, and most importantly, have characters, even though that they are two-dimensional, that you either really, really like or really, really hate.
Yeah, and I mean, that's Con Air to a T. Mm-hmm. Few good jokes. That's all you need.
Yep. And one of Dave Chappelle's first somewhat bigger roles than he had in the past. Dave Chappelle has actually been around since the early 90s.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. Anyway, shall I go on with my next one?
Yes, please do.
All right. And this particular movie is planted the seed for this particular episode,
yes,
because it is a movie that we ended up seeing tonight. I've made it no secret that I love action movies, and I think one of the greatest directors of action movies out there is John Woo. Got to start in Hong Kong, essentially created what is called gun fu, which is stylized gun work, where, the people with guns have guns in both hands and they're jumping through the air and doing, moonsaults or, all kinds of crazy acrobatics, because it's what it's meant to do, essentially. And it's a, tradition in Hong Kong filmmaking is replace swords with guns. It's no different than, like a samurai, or ninja fights or something like that. But it's just simply using guns. But in 1997, he was in America, ready to make a second Hollywood film. It was a film that was originally meant to star Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, but luckily, John Travolta and Nicolas Cage were, set to star in this movie from John Woo called Face Off.
Face Off.
You gotta face off.
Face off.
With the hand gesture and everything. Now, this is your first time seeing it as we record this tonight. What were your thoughts on Face Off before I talk about it?
I did watch the whole thing. I did not fall asleep. So it passes, the smell test for something that's better than, say, Rambo. The premise really threw me off because it's just so far-fetched. Like, that technology doesn't exist, and it would be so weird to be like, let us change your face and put you in jail, and only the three of us will know about it, and it's a dangerous criminal. Like, yeah, the whole premise was just non-believable for me. So it was hard for me to relax into caring about the characters when I couldn't suspend my disbelief that I was watching a movie.
Fair enough there. There are excuse me. There are certain movies that you gotta suspend a lot of disbelief to make work. So I can understand if there's a piece of the story that would definitely pull you out of it. And yeah, it is not like Law and Order or anything like that. It's not the FBI doesn't start shooting a house with machine guns from across the street when they visibly see a young kid is in the building there.
Yeah.
But for the sake of film, it works because, again, like I mentioned with Con Air, I mean, these things rely upon character. And I think, whether, it was two-dimensional acting, but, Travolta and Nicolas Cage, you cared about their characters in that particular movie.
You did. And, it was kind of fun to try and not forget who was who. Because they changed, spoiler, they change character completely. So what you end up with is John Travolta playing Nick Cage playing a psychopath. And Nick Cage playing John Travolta
playing Nick Cage.
playing Nick Cage.
Mm-hmm.
So it was fun in that way to be like, which one is the good guy and which one is the bad guy? I'm so confused. And in most of the fight scenes, I would get that way. And I'd be like, go John Travolta, who's the good guy. And then I was like, wait, no, that's the wrong guy. Go Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, and also, too, I think a lot of times with action movies, they are one of the genres of film that I do think primarily, work via the big screen. I think some of the effects of, action sequences in movies, if they're shown on a television, even with television with today's standards, I'm not talking the traditional, box television like we used to have, something like we have now, still can't necessarily give you the immersive experience you get in the theater, with the sound blaring at you and just how big and mammoth that screen is, and that can take away the experience. I think it is meant to overwhelm you and awe you, like James Bond skiing off the mountain and then the parachute coming out with the Union Jack looks bad fucking ass on the big screen.
Yeah, it does.
On your TV it looks cool, but it's like you notice everything else around it, and I think that's part of it too. In some ways, I guess it's like wrestling because in the audience in the movie with action fans, there is a mood that occurs.
Is there?
I do feel it. Yeah.
What is it? What kind of mood is it?
Excitement. You like, again, fast cars, things blowing up. You like everything going on. I mean, that's the second big thing for actions as well, because you got to have, something compelling that's going to put your characters in danger, that's going to want to make the audience see them come back and win,
Yeah. Yeah, and good action movies do that.
Mm-hmm. And bad ones are starring Bruce Willis. But anyway.
Except for Die Hard.
True, but I'm talking about it. We know for a fact he doesn't act anymore, and I think we did an episode on Hump Day about Bruce Willis. But some of his last films were clearly done for money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, enough about that. What's your next choice?
My next choice is going to be Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Have you seen this film?
No, but I believe it's starring Kevin Spacey, or he's in it, and it's directed by Clint Eastwood, right?
Correct. It also stars Matthew McConaughey, I believe. Or he's in it. No, he's not. Sorry. Kevin Spacey is the main character.
Let me look it up while you go on.
Okay. It's the story of New Orleans, I believe. Perhaps
Wilmington, Delaware. No.
It could be Athens, Georgia.
I know it's definitely from the South. I don't want the book, Wikipedia. I want the movie. There we go. John Cusack. Mm-hmm. Jude Law. Mm-hmm. That had to have been one of his very first American films, at the very least. Yeah, Kevin Spacey, Allison Eastwood. Ooh, nobody else with a bigger name that I recognize.
Yeah, so these guys are all. Does it say where it was set? That's what I'm trying to remember.
I love Mercer House. Where's the Mercer House? Mercer House in Savannah, Georgia.
Okay, Savannah, Georgia. So they have these really good Georgia accents, and that's fun. And then it's a mystery. It's like a mystery thriller, and I love a mystery thriller, a good mystery thriller. And I love John Cusack, or I did at the time. And so I thought it was a really great movie. It's really entertaining. I've watched it probably 7 or 8 times. I used to have it on DVD and would watch it every once in a while. And it was just one of those films that you never really heard much about, based on a book. Probably wasn't that great of a producer of money. It certainly wasn't in the top 10 films. But for me, it's a really good movie.
Well, that's the thing with Clint Eastwood films. I mean, a lot of his movies are stark contrast to the films that we know him for. He did The Bridges in Madison County, for instance, and a number of other ones, $1 Million Baby, a different one. But, for the longest time, he had the reputation in Hollywood of being a director that would continuously bring in his films under budget. And if you bring them in under budget and your film makes the most modest of profit, you're still making good money. Mm-hmm. Clint Eastwood was not, helming Marvel movies, so, none of his movies, I believe, if anything, at the max, he probably got like a $50 million budget for something. Maybe not necessarily this film, but maybe for another one. But that would be the highest of what he did. He would generally keep his budgets really, really low. So that would give him a lot more freedom because he had the name value to find an obscure book and, put out a movie about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's worth watching, I think. So if you haven't seen it, you should.
Yep. All right. Now, I mentioned in 1997, and I think I've probably mentioned it on the show here before, but I will say it again. That was the year I turned 21. And, everybody remembers their first time, right? Uh-huh. My first time watching a James Bond movie in theaters was in 1997. And it was the Pierce Brosnan classic Tomorrow Never Dies. Just from first frame. And again, this is what the beauty of those films are, why I think the Bond movies speak much better on the big screen, and why I would hope they never have a James Bond TV show. Because, seeing the traditional gun barrel sequence at the beginning on the big screen is awe-inspiring in a lot of ways. The opening sequence where Bond, is at a terrorist, gathering and notices there's a jet that has some nuclear missiles on there. So, he of course has to kill everybody and then fly the jet off a mountain. And then all of a sudden the pilot he knocked out in the jet wakes up and starts choking him. And then there's another jet above their jet, and Bond has to hit the ejector seat, and the pilot shoots up into the other jet, which blows up, and then Bond is backseat driver, and I loved that opening sequence. Sheryl Crow, I know she's not your favorite singer, but her the cover she did of Tomorrow Never Dies, the song, I think for my money would be in my top 5 of best Bond songs ever.
Whoa.
Yeah. It also introduced American audiences to current Academy Award winner Michelle Yeoh.
Oh, nice.
So there was that. Terry Hatcher was in it. Sorry about that. But Jonathan Pryce was in it, even though he didn't have much fun doing the movie. But aboard, Jonathan Pryce is still going to give you one hell of a performance. He played a media tycoon in the vein of Rupert Murdoch, who's ultimately the bad guy in the movie. And it from first frame to last, really good. Desmond Llewellyn, who played the original Q in the Bond series, that was his second to last film. But the big thing for that film for me was about halfway through.
What was that?
Yeah, and there's a scene where Bond, after he just introduced himself to the big villain as, a reporter or something like that, he goes back to his hotel room. He's sitting there waiting for the bad guys to come because he knows they're going to come. And he takes a bottle of Smirnoff vodka, pours himself a shot and downs it. And I'm sitting in the theater. I'd never gotten drunk yet, folks. I'm sitting in the theater thinking, if James Bond can do that, so can I. So after the movie, I went to the store, bought like a 5th of Smirnoff vodka because, if it's good enough for Bond, it's good enough for me, right? Went home, baked some potatoes, butter, put some vegetables on it and all that stuff. When I make baked potatoes, they're good. And just started drinking the vodka, and boy, did I get drunk. I mean, I will not drink. I have a general rule of if I throw up on a particular liquor, I will not drink it again. And that was the birth of that rule.
I see.
Because boy, did I throw up.
Did it ruin baked potatoes for you?
Oh, hell no.
Oh, no, you still like baked potatoes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's my James Bond story. But did you see that? I'm sure you've seen that movie, right?
I must have, but I have no recollection of it to speak of.
Okay. I forgive you. What is your next one?
So my last one is probably what is my favorite and most enduring movie from 1997 is The Amistad. Have you seen it?
No.
Okay. It's the great story of slaves who were taken from Africa, taken to the West Indies, where they were then sold and transported to mainland United States. While they were on that voyage, the boat went off course and wrecked in New England. So they had gotten so far off course that they wrecked in New England. And so all these chained Africans are rescued, and then the question is what to do with them. Are they slaves, or are they, kidnapped people? Slavery, importation of slaves at the time was illegal. So for a long time you could actively go to Africa, kidnap people, bring them back to the United States, and enslave them. After a while of that, they decided, well, we shouldn't do that. That's cruel. But these people who are already here, we can continue to use them as slave labor, and we can continue to use their children in perpetuity as slaves. When they're discovered or recovered, then there's this question of, do they belong to the people who purported to buy them in the West Indies, or were they not saleable to begin with, right? Because it was illegal to sell them. It's a legal story. So the story is mostly about Matthew McConaughey, who is a young attorney who represents the Amistad passengers, if you can call them that. And, it's about finding the right legal argument to protect your clients and sort of going back through history to figure out, what law applied when what action happened.
Did that movie inspire your journey?
Oh, I think so, for sure. Because it was, all the examples we have in popular media of attorneys doing the right thing, I always like those. I always like those. I always like the idea of, a person could make a big difference.
So you were not a Lionel Hutz fan on The Simpsons?
Well, I think Lionel Hutz is hilarious, and I've used him in class a lot for what not to do.
Okay. Well, that's good. Anything else about Amistad?
I just encourage people to watch it if they haven't. It's a really great movie.
Okay. Well, shall I end things this week?
Let's wrap it up.
All right. Yeah, there were a number of films of 1997 that I could have added to this list. I mean, Good Will Hunting could have easily have been on there. I wouldn't have said so in 97, but now I would have probably have considered it. Titanic. Seeing that on the big screen. I mean, it's... Return of the Cuff, yeah. But Titanic is one of those films that, if you saw it on the big screen, you understand why people, in our era, went nuts to see that movie in theaters, because it was breathtaking. And, but I had to go with this particular film here. It was the third film from Quentin Tarantino. It was Jackie Brown. It was based on a book by Elmore Leonard called Rum Punch, I believe. And that was, I believe, to date, Tarantino's only movie based on somebody else's work, which was very, very different for him. And I think gave us a slightly different result than we've gotten from, some of his other films set in his world,
Right.
You have an all-star cast. You have some great lines in the film, like, Samuel L. Jackson, of course, delivers, one of my favorite lines of, when you absolutely, positively got to kill every motherfucker in the room, except no substitutes. Bridget Fonda's in the movie. One of, I believe, her last big film. She's someone who intentionally bowed out of Hollywood life, which good for her, because that was her choice. She did it voluntarily and is happy with her life. As a fan of hers, I wish we could have seen a lot more. Yeah. I mean, I didn't think she was anything special. Fuck you, Bridget. Again, though, the story overall, one hell of a great story. And this was at the time where Tarantino as well was still finding actors that were not beyond their prime, but were not being considered for big-time roles, like Pam Grier. Right. Pam Grier gave one hell of a performance as Jackie Brown, and the soundtrack, too. I mean, the soundtrack, in this, I would say rivals the Dead President soundtrack for, a great primer for people like myself who are not familiar with, like, soul or funk or R&B. It's like, you want to know where to start? Here. Listen to this, play this, and, you'll be able to branch out and go from there. So I think, and I know when the film came out, and, Spike Lee has been very vocal over the years about, how he disagrees with Tarantino being liberal with words that he uses for certain characters. Mm-hmm. And I think we know which one we're talking about. But I think Tarantino shows that an artist shouldn't... If an artist's intention is to show something real and to show something that's not punching down at people or something like that, but just showing a slice of life, that if that is the honesty that these people say words that everybody in real life finds bad, then that should be there. If you get my point,
it's part of the character.
It is.
It's part of character development.
And we know when it works, and we know as viewers when it doesn't work. And I fully understand, watching something where it doesn't work, why people would be upset and why I wouldn't want to see it, again. But if it works and you get the intention of what the artist was trying to put forth, I think by all means enjoy, because it's a slice of life,
Yeah.
But, it's Tarantino. I mean, just like last week with our best album, worst album, I mean, Tarantino at his absolute worst is still going to be much more entertaining than many, many filmmakers today.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, Tarantino's great.
Yes. Any other thoughts on 1997?
I wish I could go back, knowing what I know now.
Yeah, I mean, we only had Lewinsky to think about.
Right, that was the height of our political terror. We were also, still involved in many, many foreign wars.
Sadly, I mean, that's still happening now, of course, but that's a different story for a different day and for a different show. Not the expert, remember?
Yes.
But yeah, and I'm looking back through rose-colored glasses. I know I am, the nostalgia glasses, but, it was a different time. It was a different stress level, and, also, put it plainly, different responsibilities. I would love it if all I had to worry about was rent and movie money today,
Right.
But I got other stuff to worry about, But that's also the part of growing older, too, is that you become interested in more stuff. Now, me, maybe not so much, but, but, PlayStations are a thing, right? I know.
PlayStations are a thing.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, as we grow older, we grow wiser, which is why we want to go back in time and sort of shake ourselves and say, what are you doing? Because we've all made mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's important not to have regrets, I think, to appreciate our lives for what they have been and to learn lessons that we've set for ourselves. Doesn't always have to be super fun, but it has to be moving and worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, the older you get, the more you realize that, you will end up being the villain in somebody's life, and you have to learn to accept that. And the idea of villain could mean anything. It could just be the slightest guffaw, or it could be something really serious. Here, folks, it's the full gamut, but it's a sucky feeling, but you have to learn to accept it to go on, because if all you did, and I'm guilty of this, if all you did was focus on how bad of a human being you've been to other people, it can make it hard for you to go on and move and hopefully change and hopefully make amends in some way, shape, or form, even if those amends don't necessarily end up directly benefiting the person you hurt, Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole idea of changing to become a better person, to not repeat those behaviors, should be a goal too.
Absolutely.
What a profound note, folks.
Profound Tim the Nerd.
Exactly. So I think that will wrap it up here.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. And anything else you want to say to our lovely folks at home?
Hope you all have a great week, and hope the sun shines on you and you feel bright and positive all week long.
Mm-hmm. And I hope your surgery goes well. We will keep you updated, and if there's an archive episode next week, we will keep you up to date to let you, the listening audience, know that it's not too serious.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'll come back next week. Professor Aubrey got knocked up on the nitrous oxide too much and went on a rampage.
It's possible.
Anything's possible, but each Saturday, we're going to have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Good night, everyone.
Snoochie boochies.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.